All right, good morning, everyone. So first of all, welcome to this new series. Baruch Hashem, it's wonderful. Wonderful to have everyone back. I give some of the women here a lot of credit because a number of you were here last night. Baruch Hashem for this year, now here again this morning. So this is our opportunity to really launch a new series, a monthly series, on the topic of Tefillah, a topic of prayer. And I have to give a thank you to Shani Tapper, our incredible executive director, because this was her idea, the topic and the series. And what I'd like to try to accomplish over the course, in Yirtzeh Hashem, over the next couple of months, is to really take a deeper look into the concept of Tefillah. What it is that we're trying to accomplish, what it is that we're trying to do, and what the entire essence of prayer truly is. Because Tefillah is one of these interesting things, being that we do it all the time, and we do it so frequently. Like anything else in life that you do with any degree of regularity, often it becomes rote. And amazingly enough, you would think that the more you do something, the more you understand it and appreciate it. Yet sometimes it's just the opposite. The more I do something, the more ragil, just regular it becomes, and the less impactful and meaningful it is. So our goal really over the course of this series is to be able to look at the concept of Tefillah, but both through the prism of Halacha as well as through Hashkafa. So to be able to appreciate it, and again, what I'm going to try to do over the course of this year is also really focus a little bit to our source sheets if anyone needs up front over here on the front table. So what I hope to really be able to focus on a little bit is some of the halachos of tefillah, specifically as they pertain to women. And again, draw those halachos into some of the hashkafa of tefillah as well. So let's begin. So today, I'm going to use really as an opportunity to build a little bit of a framework of tefillah. So if you take a look at number 1, so the Torah says, "V'haya'im shamoa tishmoa mitzvosai, asher anochi mitzaveh eschem hayom li'avas Hashem Elokechem, u'la'avdo b'chol avavechem u'v'chol nafshechem." A pasuk with which we are incredibly familiar with, a pasuk from Kriyas Shema. And the Torah says, if you will listen to my mitzvos that I'm commanding you today, to love Hashem, to serve Him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. So interestingly enough, the Gemara struggles to understand what does it mean to serve Hashem with all of your heart. You see, all of my soul, I understand. What does it mean to serve Hashem with all of your soul? What would you think? A willingness to give your life. Right? B'chol nafshechem, with all of your soul, means a willingness to give of my entirety, my life, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That if chas v'shalom I am called upon to give my life for the Ribono Shel Olam, I stand ready to do so. I stand ready to do so. Interestingly enough, what Professor Rabbi Soloveitchik points out, he says that we often speak about, when we speak about Kiddush Hashem, there's sheets right up here for me. When we speak about Kiddush Hashem, just do me a favor, maybe just take a few to the back. Thank you. So when we speak about Kiddush Hashem, often the reference is to dying al Kiddush Hashem. Rabbi Soloveitchik points out, dying al Kiddush Hashem is easy. Why? You only have to do it once. Living al Kiddush Hashem is a much greater challenge, because that has to be done each and every day. But what does it mean to serve Hashem with all of my heart? B'chol levavchem. So all of my soul I understand. The Gemara says, afilu notel nafshecha. Even if Hashem is ready to take my life, I have to stand ready to give my life to the Ribono Shel Olam. But what does it mean to serve Hashem with all of my heart? And here the Gemara says, we actually just started this. We just started Maseches Tainis in Daf Yomi just a few days ago, and this is one of the first Gemaras in number 2. Disanya, li'avas Hashem Elokechem u'la'avdo b'chol levavchem. To love Hashem and to serve Him with all of my heart. Ezo hi avodas shebalev. How do you serve God with your heart? Havi Omer zo tefillah. So what's serving Hashem with your heart? Prayer. Prayer. The concept of, so this is incredible, just so you understand how Chazal understand the concept of prayer in its most basic essence. Tefillah means to serve the Ribono Shel Olam with my heart, which tells you something amazing. That from a Gemara perspective, the most important and impactful part of tefillah is not what you say, but rather it's what? How you feel. how you feel. Which now again, part of the interesting thing about Yiddishkeit is, and you find this in all areas, there is often this meeting point between what we'll call the essence of halacha and the mechanistic details of halacha. And our job is to marry both of them together. Because sometimes you look at the mechanistic details and you don't always see the spirit. And in the spirit, you don't always see the mechanistic details. So this is a little bit of the hybrid model that we have to create in everything in our Yiddishkeit. Same thing with Shabbos. How many times does it happen that maybe you've thought this or you've heard someone else say this? Does God really care if I turn on a light on Shabbos? Right, really? The Rebbe Shalom is running the world, and he's standing there, look, if I go like this, go like that, go like this, go like that, go like this, like this. So the answer is, does Kadosh Baruch Hu care? I don't know if Kadosh Baruch Hu cares or not. But the Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to do it, right? So meaning, there's this marriage often between the spirit of the law, what the neshama of the halacha is, and the mechanistic details. So the reason this is very important is because we're starting out with the neshama of tefillah. What is the essence of the prayer experience? Chazal call it avoda shebalev. It is a service. It is a service of the heart. And again, learned from the pasuk, ula'avdo bichol levavichem. To serve Hashem with all of your heart. How do you serve God with your heart? Prayer. Now, let's understand, whenever we're going to start really through the prism of halacha today. Whenever we look at a particular issue in halacha, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, a little bit of halachic analysis. First question, whenever you deal with a particular mitzvah, what's the first question? Such a modest group. Okay, incredible. Is it da'oraisa or d'Rabbanan? Is it biblical or rabbinic? Because whether or not something is biblical or rabbinic frames the rest of the halacha. By the way, especially for women, whether something is biblical or rabbinic has many ramifications. In fact, interestingly enough, one of the most fascinating distinctions over here is between Sfardim and Ashkenazim, whether or not women make brachos over mitzvos d'Rabbanan. A point of contention between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. Again, we'll get to all of these things, but to know, is something biblical or is something rabbinic? So at first glance, what would you say? Is tefillah biblical or rabbinic? Rabbinic, why? Okay, so you're looking at the siddur. You're looking at, remember, we haven't gotten to the siddur yet. We're talking just about the concept of prayer. Is concept of prayer biblical or rabbinic? Biblical. Biblical, why?
Because our Abbas did it.
Good. You're thinking too much, by the way, right? Why would it be biblical? Where did we just derive the concept of prayer from? A pasuk. A pasuk. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Ula'avdo bichol levavichem. You have to serve Hashem with all of your heart. The Gemara says, what does that mean to serve Hashem with all of your heart? That's prayer. Now, let me go back to something that was just mentioned. This idea that the Avos daven, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Avram daven Shachris, Yitzchak Mincha, Yaakov Mar. So of course, first of all, you know that of course that's not literal, right? Avram Avinu didn't open up the Siddur and start davening Shachris, and Yitzchak didn't start with Ashrei and daven Mincha, and Yaakov didn't say V'hurachum and then begin with Ma'ariv. That's not what happened. They each prayed in the morning. Avram prayed in the morning, Yitzchak in the afternoon, Yaakov in the evening. In fact, Rav Hirsch brings down, interestingly enough, that actually all three Avos daven 3 times a day. Avram daven what we'll call Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, Yitzchak Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, Yaakov Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv. So why is each Av associated with one tefillah? Because that's reflective of their personalistic mission. Avram Avinu lived, or what he was the dawn of monotheism. That's why he is most closely associated with Shachris. Yaakov Avinu, I'm going to skip Yitzchak for just a second. Yaakov Avinu davens Ma'ariv. Ma'ariv is davened when? When is Ma'ariv davened? At night. Nighttime represents uncertainty, difficulty, tragedy. Very much characterizes Yaakov Avinu's life. Yaakov has a dramatically turbulent life. Yaakov teaches us how to daven and how to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even at night. And Yitzchak davens Mincha. Because what was Yitzchak Avinu? He was the bridge. He was the bridge patriarch. His job was to take the foundation of his father, build up upon it so that his son could create exponential growth. That's Mincha, the bridge tefillah. Just as an aside, I'll just also mention something very important, which is, we will see, we're going to get into now the halacha, is tefillah da'oraisa or d'Rabbanan? Is it biblical, is it rabbinic? The discussion regarding patriarchal prayer does not come into play. And the reason it doesn't is as follows. There is a principle in the Yerushalmi, Jerusalem Talmud, of Ein Lemedin Davar Mikodem Matan Torah. We do not learn any binding halacha from anything that occurred before Sinaitic revelation. So all of the stories in Bereshis, right? All of the stories in Bereshis and even beginning of Shmos, none of it creates binding halachic obligations. The perfect example of this is, where did we learn the mitzvah of bris milah from? Circumcision. Where did we learn it from? What's your reflexive answer? Now you're afraid to say it. What's your Avram. Good. Except that's not true. Meaning Avram Avinu was the first person to do a bris milah, but the mitzvah of milah is actually brought down in Parsha, in Chumash Vayikra, in Parshas Sazria, right after the Torah speaks about the laws of childbirth. The Torah speaks about Ubayom Hashmini Yimal Bisar Arlasal. On the 8th day, you circumcise a baby boy. Why is that restated? Why is it restated? Because again, we have this principle, and it's actually incredibly important halachically. We don't learn any binding generational halacha from anything that occurred before Har Sinai, anything that occurred before Sinaitic revelation. Actually, interesting, a fascinating question on that topic actually comes up in this week's parsha, because what's in this week's parsha? Gid Hanosha. That you're not allowed to eat the sciatic nerve. So interestingly enough, it doesn't appear that prohibition is mentioned again in the Torah. It seems to be an exclusion to this rule. But again, we'll leave that on the side. So now, focusing back a little bit. Is tefillah d'oraisa or d'rabbanan? Is it biblical or rabbinic? Well, so comes the Rambam in number 3, and the Rambam says, mitzvahs aseh lehispala b'chol yom. It is a biblical mitzvah to daven each and every day. Shene'emar v'avaretem es Hashem Elokechem mipi Shmuel lamdu she'avoda zo hi tefillah shene'emar ula'avdo b'chol levavechem. And he quotes the Gemara. So interesting, so the Rambam says the concept of prayer is a biblical obligation. But look what the Rambam says at the end of number 3. Ve'ein minyan tefillos min haTorah, ve'ein mishnah tefillah zos min haTorah, ve'ein letefillah zman kavod min haTorah. So the Rambam paskins that there is a biblical obligation to pray. But according to the Rambam, how do you satisfy that biblical obligation? Tefillah as we have it today, right, in the Siddur, codified, the fact that there's a time for davening, the number of times you have to daven, none of that is biblical. So the Rambam adopts this interesting position, that the concept of tefillah is biblical. But how do you fulfill biblical prayer? How do you fulfill it? You speak to Hashem, whatever you want to say. Thank you, Hashem. I'm in need, Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, help me with this. Please deliver me from that. You fulfill the biblical obligation of prayer through simple dialogue. Through simple dialogue. That's it. And when do you fulfill this simple dialogue? When do you fulfill it? When? Whenever you want. How often do you fulfill it? As frequently as you'd like. So the Rambam adopts this incredible idea. Tefillah, in its essence, avoda shebalev, what we'll call a dialogical connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A need to speak to God is a biblical obligation. But the only thing that's biblical is the actual dialogue. How you want to dialogue, when you want to dialogue, what you want the substance of the dialogue to be about, that's up to you. That's up to you. So when did it happen that we developed the Siddur? So we're going to talk about this more, but I'll just show you this very quickly. Look at the Rambam in number 4. The Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah writes, Kevan shegalu Yisov me'ei Nebuchadnezzar harasha, mis'arvu beparas v'yavan v'shar umos, v'noldu lahem banim ba'artzos hagoyim. So listen to this. Says the Rambam, then something amazing happened. Something not amazing, dramatically tragic happened. Jewish people were exiled. We were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, right, who was the king of Babel, right, the head of the Babylonian Empire, who was responsible ultimately for the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. So there is a massive wave of exiles, right? It first starts with the exile of the 10 tribes, and then ultimately, again, the remaining tribes as well afterwards. So what happens? There's exile. Now, what happened during exile? So ultimately, people resettle, they restart new lives, they have families, they have children. And what happens? V'osan habanim nisbalbalu sefasam. Here's what was fascinating. You had children born in the diaspora that did not have a mastery of language. You see, this is incredible. What happened? The children born in the diaspora were born to whom? We'll call them immigrant parents. Immigrant parents. So that happens with immigrant parents. Again, we still know because many of us have immigrant parents, had immigrant parents, right? They never fully master the new language, right? So there's a lot of sprinkling of a lot of different things, a lot of mispronunciations. So you have children born in the diaspora without mastery of a particular language. V'haisa safas kol echad ve'echad me'uravos me'lashonos harbe. So what happened? So children born in the diaspora, they didn't master any one language. So at home, parents are probably speaking Hebrew. Right? Out wherever they were, people were speaking all different dialects. V'kevan shahaya midaber eino yochel daber kol tzarcha b'lashon achos, ela b'shibu shinara u'b'neihem chatzi midaber ashdodis. Ve'eino makir midaber Yehudis. So listen to what the Rambam says. This is absolutely incredible. The Rambam says children born in the diaspora did not have mastery over any one language. What happens when you don't have mastery over any one language? What happens? Dialogue becomes frustrating. Dialogue, right? You ever see a young child who's beginning to speak and they say something to the parent, right? And the parent says, I don't know what you're saying, right? And the child becomes so frustrated because the child thinks that they're expressing themselves in a totally coherent fashion. Children born in the diaspora were unable to go. So often what happens, by the way, if the parent can't chap it, what does the child do? Child just gives up. So the Rambam describes something amazing. The Rambam says that children born in the diaspora did not have mastery over a language and therefore were unable to fully express themselves. Because they were unable to fully express themselves, prayer became a frustrating experience. Now remember, which prayer are we talking about? So the Rambam is referring over to biblical prayer. And what was biblical prayer? Whatever you want, whenever you want, about whatever you want, how often. But that requires the ability of self-expression. That requires the ability to articulate, to be able to go ahead and actually say words and actually express yourself. So the Rambam is describing over here, the generation born in the diaspora were unable to fully express themselves. As a result, dialogue with God became a frustrating experience. So what happens when people become frustrated? What happens? They stop davening. But I just want to tell you something. This is so incredibly important. You know, people today, right? It's interesting to see, if you speak to a lot of parents, especially young children, often tefillah is a struggle. Right? I don't mean for the parents, I mean for the kids. Right? Hard to get kids to daven. I want to tell you a little secret. We have to do a better job in our schools and in our homes of teaching Kriya. Do you know how many beautiful neshamas there are of boys and girls who go through schools, yeshivas, day schools, Beis Yaakov, and they can't read Hebrew appropriately? They can't read. They're breaking their teeth over a pasuk in Chumash. They're breaking their teeth over a section in the Siddur. And then we wonder why our children don't like davening. Again, it's nothing new. It's the Rambam. Hilchos Tefillah, Perek Aleph, Halacha Daled. If it doesn't flow off your tongue, it just becomes a frustrating experience. And if it becomes, see, adults, a lot of times, especially if somebody comes to Yiddishkeit a little bit later, and so maybe they don't have a mastery over language, see, adults are more motivated. Because even if I can't read the Hebrew, I can read the English, and I'm motivated to daven. But for children, the Klal Gadol is anything that is too difficult or too frustrating, they're simply going to give up on it. And I can't tell you. And by the way, this is so true in everything. It's true for learning also. If you can't really read a pasuk in Chumash, you're not really going to be motivated to go ahead and look at Rashi or to go ahead and learn. And it's incredible because too often we kind of push kids through a system, and it only becomes apparent in middle school. Again, and I see this all the time, and it's heartbreaking. It becomes apparent in middle school, the kid can't read. I don't mean learning differences. I mean just a kid, sometimes it is learning differences also. A kid can't read Lashon HaKodesh. So how do I want them to enjoy davening? How do I want them to enjoy learning? So again, I just want to point out, this is historically what happened to our people. People couldn't express themselves. They stopped davening. And by the way, this is the good old days when what was davening? 20 seconds, you're in and out, right? Some people would love this today, right? So 20 seconds. Thank you, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I love you, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the best Kadosh Baruch Hu, I need this. That's it. And then done. That was it. That was all tefillah had to be. But yet the inability to express myself in a comprehensive, coherent fashion caused people simply to give up, to just give up. So what happened? If you look at number 4, I'm now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. Kevan Shira Ezra Ubeis Dino. When Ezra and his Beis Din. So remember again, Ezra and his Beis Din, also known as Anshe Knesses Hagidola, men of the Great Assembly, which was the highest rabbinic body during the times in the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash into the second temple era. Ezra and his Beis Din decided, Amdu v'tiknulen shmona esrei brachos al haseder. So organized prayer as we have it today, what we call shmona esrei. We're going to see, by the way, that the Siddur as we have it was built out in stages. It wasn't all created at once. The first actual rabbinic tefillah creation was Shmona Esrei. That was the first thing, Shmona Esrei. Shema, of course, is different because Shema is 3 paragraphs from the Torah. But remember again, those paragraphs do not occur consecutively in the Torah, right? It was the rabbis who linked those paragraphs together for prayer. So the first innovation, the first prayer innovation by the Rabbanim was Shmona Esrei. And Ezra and his Beis Din decided, let's create Shmona Esrei. This way everyone has an organized text from which to pray. The hope being that it will avoid frustration. People know what they have to do. They can practice one text. That text, Shmona Esrei, is a catch-all, right? There's nothing that you could possibly want that's not included in Shmona Esrei. And even if it's not somehow included in Shmona Esrei, Shema Kolenu is a catch-all for everything. Shalosh, and then the Rambam goes on to explain the structure. Kadeshu aruchos befiakol v'lamdu osan v'tia tfilas elu ha'alogim tfilas shlema ketfilas bali alashon hatzacha. So again, this is the Rambam. So the fascinating Rambam. I'll give much more to say on this, but for our purposes now we'll move on. So the Rambam says, therefore, in its essence, prayer is biblical, but biblical prayer is only just a straight dialogue with God. However, whenever and whatever you want. When did everything change? And I want to point out, the Rambam says that's the optimal way to pray. Right? What's very important that the Rambam is teaching us is the purest form of prayer is unstructured, spontaneous dialogue. That's the best way to pray. That's the best way to pray, right? It would be no different. It's like if you give someone a card. Let's say you give someone you love a card, a birthday, an anniversary, whatever it might be. And remember, if you just give them the card and it has the message and you don't personalize it, most people will say, wow, that's a lack of sensitivity. I mean, Hallmark is great, don't get me wrong, right? But at the end of the day, unless you make it yours, right? Even if you just write, dear so-and-so, love so-and-so, it's just someone else's card. Prayer in its essence really is not supposed to be scripted. Right? Tefillah in its essence is not supposed to come from a book. Tefillah in its essence is supposed to come from my heart. So that's why it's called Avodah Shebalev. I'm just supposed to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when I want, for what I want, and how I want. But there was an existential crisis. The concept of prayer was about to disappear because people were no longer confident enough in their ability to express themselves. At that moment, Chazal step in and they organize Shmona Esrei. Now, this is the position of the Rambam. The Ramban, I didn't include it on the sheet, but the Ramban Nachmanides disagrees. And he says, prayer is not biblical. Prayer is not biblical. In fact, he says, there is one form of biblical prayer, but that is only be'es tzara. Only in times of difficulty or only in times of danger is there an obligation, a biblical obligation to reach out to God. But day-to-day dialogue is not a biblical obligation. Rather, it is only a rabbinic obligation. So this machlokas, Rambam and the Ramban, and again, what does the Ramban do with the Gemara in number 2? Based on the pasuk in number 1, he says this is called an asmachta. Asmachta means that sometimes the rabbis legislate laws, and they find a biblical allusion to their law. But again, the pasuk is not really coming to teach me this idea, it's an allusion to it. So fundamental dispute between the Rambam and the Ramban about the nature of tefillah. And again, we'll see this machlokes come up all the time on many different halachic issues. And again, we'll see all of this, but what I want to point out is as follows. What does everyone agree with? Everyone agrees that the way we daven today, right? A structured prayer with different tefillos for the morning, the afternoon, the evening, that framework is rabbinic. That framework is rabbinic. But the Rambam is very important to hold in your back pocket. Why? Because again, what the Rambam does tell us is that one could fulfill biblical prayer simply through what? Spontaneous dialogue. They say about the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim said he never saw his mother daven. Never saw his mother daven. He said, I'm sure she davened, but he never saw his mother daven. Now, I'm sure she davened also, but what you begin to see is biblical prayer, according to the Rambam at least, is just a spontaneous dialogue. It does not require a siddur, and it does not require structured prayer, and it does not require, again, Shmona Esrei here 3 times a day, is spontaneous dialogue. So that's our halachic framework that we're going to be operating from over the next couple of months in Mirz Hashem. What I want to draw your attention to, kind of just by setting the table, is it's interesting when we look at the biblical examples of tefillah, what type of examples we find. So first of all, a dramatic one is found in this week's parasha, number 5. Right? Remember again, Parashas Vayishlach, Yaakov Avinu is preparing for the encounter with Esav, and he davens to Hashem. And what does he say to Hashem? Hatzileni na miad achi miad Esav. Peikiyore anochi oso penyovo v'hikani ema bonim. Yaakov Avinu reached out, Kadosh Baruch Hu, save me from Esav. Save me from Esav. So what type of tefillah is Yaakov davening? What type of tefillah? Right? Angst, anxiety, danger, we'll call it a deliverance prayer. I am in difficult situation. I need you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to come through for me. Which, by the way, we're going to see a number of examples like this. This is what bolsters the Ramban's approach. That he says, really, the only obligation to pray is when you're in danger. You could always talk to God whenever you want, but there's not necessarily an obligation. Another example, number 6. Vayigash Avram Vayomer Av Tispet Tzadikim Rosh. Another example of prayer. Right? Avram Avinu davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save Sodom. He hears that Sodom is going to be destroyed, and ultimately he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're going to wipe out the righteous with the wicked, and then he begins his bargaining. Number 7. Vayetar Yitzchak L'Hashem L'nochach Ishto. Yitzchak davened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for his wife, for Rivka Imenu. So, what do you begin to see? You begin to see a pattern. That almost all biblical examples of prayer are in what situation? What situation? Dire. We're dire, right? Dire. Where either people need something, or there's danger. So either again there's a need or there's a danger. What don't we see in biblical prayer? Spontaneous dialogue for the sake of dialogue. Now again, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Right? Remember, the Torah is not a storybook. It also doesn't tell us what Avram Avinu ate for breakfast, but I'm sure he ate breakfast, right? So in other words, the Torah is not a storybook, so not every single detail is included. What's included are the details we need to know. But it is fascinating to see that the primary examples of tefillah are all when people need things. And in fact, the most dramatic example of tefillah, which actually serves as the paradigm for modern day prayer, from which Chazal crafted modern day prayer, of course, is number 8, the Tefillah of Chana. The Tefillah of Chana. So the Tefillah of Chana, and again, we're going to spend a lot of time in the coming months. Probably should do this more than once a month, but okay. We're going to spend time over the coming years, Mirz Hashem, focusing on Tefillah Chana. I will tell you, I've mentioned this before in a different context. Everybody has their most moving Eretz Yisrael moments. So I remember a number of years ago, when Liv and I were privileged to be in Eretz Yisrael with our family, we went to Shiloh. People often don't go to Shiloh, but Shiloh is an incredible place to visit. It's the site of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was there for over 400 years, and they literally know exactly where the Mishkan was. So you could stand in the site of the Mishkan. Amazingly enough, in the areas around Shiloh, you could still find pottery shards dating back to the times of the Mishkan. Why are you finding pottery shards? Because when people would come to the Mishkan to offer up their karbanos, so what would happen? You would offer your karban. The halacha by Shiloh was you had to eat your sacrificial meat within sight, within vision of the Mishkan. Well, if you notice how Shiloh, if you've ever been to Shiloh, the Mishkan is perched on a hilltop, and there's a whole bunch of hills surrounding it. So people would offer their karbanos, take their sacrificial meat, and sit with their families on the hilltops surrounding. So what would people often eat their carbonic meat in? Earthenware. The problem with earthenware is it cannot be kashered. Therefore, once an earthenware vessel absorbed sacrificial meat absorptions, there was nothing to do with it anymore. So what would people do with their earthenware vessels when they were leaving Shiloh? They'd break them. So literally to this day, you can go and you could find pottery shards. I took a bunch of them. I hope that's legal, but you can, right? You can literally find pottery shards dating back to the times of the Mishkan. Incredible. But the most moving part was, right by the area of the Mishkan, they have on a beautiful screen there written Tefillah Chana, the Tefillah of Chana. And I remember then I don't think my boys were with us then, but my wife and my daughters davened there. And to see a Jewish woman and daughters davening at the site, literally the very site that Chana said her tefillah, which not only got her a son, not only got her Shmuel, but ultimately, again, that tefillah which serves as the paradigm. Chana's tefillah is the paradigm, right? The paradigm for tefillah does not come from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Timing maybe comes from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But how we daven, the entire structure of davening all comes from Chana. So to be in that site where this broken woman uttered this spectacular prayer, nothing like it. Absolutely nothing like it. So let's take a look at number 8. Because Tefillah Chana is also something very important, which we're going to spend a lot of time on. So Vihi Maras Nefesh. So remember again, without going into the whole story right now, you know the story of Chana. Chana is married to a man by the name of Elkanah, and Chana doesn't have children. Chana doesn't have children. So Vahi Maras Nefesh Vatispalav al Hashem Ubachot Tivke. And Chana is heartbroken. Vatidor Neder Vatomer Hashem Tzivakos. And now in number 8 is her tefillah. This is the tefillah of Chana, which we don't have to get into right now because we're going to focus on that more in coming shiurim. Because again, how Chana davened and what she davened again serves as. But here's what's amazing. You see, Chana's tefillah, if you look at it just on a basic level, is no different than the previous tefillah. It's what we call petitional prayer. Right? Petitional prayer, I need something. So it's no different than Yaakov saying, God, I need you to deliver me from Esav. No different than Avram saying, God, I need you to deliver stone. No different than Yitzchak davening on behalf of his wife. What's unique about Tefillas Chana was the Navi goes out of its way to tell us about how long it took. Right? Chana's coming to the Mishkan year after year after year. It was a saga. Right? Remember again, Yaakov davens for deliverance, and what happens? What happens? I don't want to spoil the story for you, but what happens? Right? Next day, deliverance. Avram davens for stone. Now it's true. He's not successful, but he's told that it's not going to answer immediately. There's immediate response. Even Yitzchak and Rivka, right? There's an understanding that as soon as the intensity of prayer happened, she was barren for a number of years, but as soon as the intensity began, the tefillos were answered. Tefillas Chana is different because Tefillas Chana is a prolonged prayer that did not have a timely answer. A prolonged prayer that did not have a timely answer. And I want to share with you something amazing. There's a beautiful set of Sfarim called Panini Halacha. There's a Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Eliezer Melamed. Rav Melamed is the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshivat Hesder in Har Bracha, an incredible Talmud Chacham, and also an incredible Baal Halacha. So he wrote a whole series on Halacha, and he happens to have called Panini Halacha, and he happens to have an entire volume. He has one volume on Tefillah, and a second volume titled Tefillas Nashim, Tefillah for women. So a whole volume on Tefillah, and a whole volume on Tefillah. And in his introduction, he says something so incredible. Take a look at number 9. He writes over here as follows. He says, Ashmuel Hanavi Amru, Shayashakul Kimoshe Va'aron. Sha'al Yidei Moshe Va'aron Iskala Dvar Hashem Metzius, Hanisis Halyona Shalamidbar, Va'al Yidei Shmuel Niskala Dvar Hashem Metzius Hamamoshes, Shal Am Yisrael Be'eretz Yisrael. Shugibe, so listen to this. We have, it's actually today's daf, which is quite amazing. We say the pasuk, Moshe Va'aron B'kohanov, U'Shmuel B'korei Shemo. Shmuel Hanavi is compared in greatness to Moshe and to Aaron. Now that's a pretty big thing, right? So why is Shmuel like Moshe and Aaron? What did Moshe and Aaron accomplish, right? What was their essence? What did they do? Moshe and Aaron created the first stage of national identity, right? Moshe and Aaron take the Jews out of Mitzrayim, bring them to Har Sinai, and it's really at Har Sinai that our identity as a nation is solidified and concretized. Shmuel Hanavi took us to the next level. Because what happened under Shmuel Hanavi's leadership? We got our first king, who was Shaul, and then we got our second king, David. Right? Again, linking back to last night's share, we spoke about the greatness of David HaMelech. David Malka Meshicha, the father of not only of a dynastic monarchy, but the father of the messianic line. Shmuel Hanavi was just like Moshe and Aaron. Moshe and Aaron took us from one stage, or really from no national identity to the first stage of national development, and ultimately Shmuel takes us to the next stage of national development as well, ushers us in to the period of Davidic monarchy. So look what Rav Malamed says, and this is so beautiful. V'harbe nevuah nevim Yisrael umikocho nivne Beis Hamikdash. And remember, Shmuel Hanavi also paved the way for the Beis Hamikdash. Because remember again, Mamish last night's share, who built the Beis Hamikdash? Shlomo, right? Part of the dynastic monarchy of David. Well, who enabled the dynastic Davidic monarchy to begin? It was Shmuel Hanavi. So look what Rav Malamed says. V'chevon shahaya bal neshama gidola ugivoa kolkach. Because Shmuel was such an elevated and saintly neshama, hayakasha lahorida laaretz. It was difficult to bring his soul down to this world. See, what Rav Malamed is saying is something that I think is absolutely incredible. Sometimes we daven for things, and we daven for incredibly important things. And sometimes the holier the thing we're davening for, the more difficult it is to get that prayer answered. See, what Rav Malamed is saying, asking is, Chana, why does Chana have so much difficulty getting her prayer answered? Right, first of all, it's a natural prayer. And again, Chana, and you see, by the way the Navi describes Chana is pretty intense. Right? Vihi maras nefesh. You know what maras nefesh means? How would you translate that? Maras nefesh? Bitter. But it's really depressed. It's depressed. The Navi describes a broken woman, which is fascinating because the Torah is filled with, or I should say Tanakh is filled with stories of women who struggled with fertility, right? The imos. But yet, amazingly enough, often we'll find different reactions. Like remember again, Rachel has one type, like we spoke about 2 weeks ago on our Tuesday night share, right? Rachel has one reaction when it's dealing with infertility. Sarah has a different reaction, but we don't see maras nefesh. We don't see a bitterness. We don't see a depression. But yet Chana has that. She's so broken. So Rav Malamed says, because Chana was destined to bring down a neshama that was going to forever change the course of the world. And that neshama was so holy that neshama did not want to come down to this world. That neshama wanted to stay in the celestial sphere. It did not want to come down. And it had to be pulled down. It had to be pulled. This is the struggle that's unfolding by Chana. She so badly wants a child, and she literally feels like, Hashkafa Baruch Hu, I don't understand. I'm not asking you for anything that crazy. I'm asking for the natural, normal things in life. So why won't you give it to me? And little does she understand the tug of war that is unfolding between heaven and earth. She wants this child, but the celestial sphere is unwilling to let go of this saintly neshama. And by the way, it gives such a profound insight in general as to why all of the imos struggled with infertility. Right? You know, we often have this statement that why did the imos struggle with childbearing? Because Hashkafa Baruch Hu mis'aveh l'tfilas shel tzadikim. Hashkafa Baruch Hu wants the tfilos of the righteous. I'm just going to be honest with you. I've always had incredible difficulty with that statement. Because what does that mean? Hakadosh Baruch Hu knows how much I love him. He knew how much Sarah Imenu loved him, and Rivka, and Rachel, and Leah. Does he need to put them through that pain? Was that necessary? But you begin to see something else. You see, when you want something, and it's meaningful and holy, understand that sometimes there is this tug of war between heaven and earth. And sometimes Shamayim was unwilling to let go of the neshama of a Yitzchak Avinu. And Shamayim was unwilling to let go of the neshama of a Yaakov Avinu. And Shamayim was unwilling to let go of the neshamas of Yosef and Binyamin. And Shamayim was unwilling to let go of the neshama of Shmuel. So says Rabbi Lam something so beautiful. V'cheivan shahaya bal neshama gidola ugavoa kol kach haya kasha lahorida laaretz. V'nitzercha chana laharbos b'tfilos at shezachsa leledes also. V'kol kach gidola isa tfilasa. So I'm just pointing. Why am I pointing this out to you? Because what chana represents is a different level in petitional prayer. You see, again, all of our biblical examples of prayer are all petitional prayer. Someone needs something, someone's in crisis, they daven. And normally, the truth is, the way it works is, the tefillos are answered, at least in the stories we see. Chana is unique, because Chana is a model where I'm asking, and I'm still not getting. See, so if Malamed says, and we're going to talk about this, because all of us struggle with this, what's the hashkafa for unanswered tefillos? What's the hashkafa? Like, how do I reconcile myself with that? I believe in a God who loves me, and I believe that a Kadosh Baruch Hu wants me to be happy, and wants me to have what I feel I need in order to be happy. And a lot of times I ask for things that seem to be like regular run-of-the-mill things that other people have, right? Not like big stuff. And I'm not getting it. So I want to believe Gamzu Latova. I want to believe there's always a plan. I want to believe, but it's hard. It's hard. We have to be honest with ourselves, right? Remember, one of the most important things in Yiddishkeit is honesty. Honesty. You don't have to put on the face of piety and pretend that everything is fine when it's not fine. I don't understand why the things that I daven for, which seem to be regular, ordinary stuff, the regular brachas in life that everybody wants to enjoy, and so many do it, I don't have it. I don't understand why that is. So obviously, there are questions that remain unanswered. But what Malamed is highlighting over here is something amazing. That sometimes what I want is of such great significance that there could be literally a tug of war between heaven and earth. That it's not that Hashkafa who doesn't want to give it to me, but that sometimes what I'm trying to draw down is so intense and so holy that Shamayim wants to keep it in the celestial sphere, but yet I so badly yearn to bring it down here. Isn't it incredible? You see, Chana suffers through all of these years, and she suffered. And by the way, I just want to point out, Chana's story doesn't have like a happy ending. I mean, it has a happy ending. She has a son, but understand, she got that son with a very heavy price tag. She pledged that son to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chana did not raise her son. Eli HaKohen raised her son. She brought her son to the Mishkan at the age of 3, and that's where he lived. The Navi points out that she would come to visit him, and she made him a me'il katan. Beautiful idea. She made him a coat. She made him a little coat. It's not a everyone lives happily ever after story. It's difficult. But it's just to understand that sometimes the things that we're davening for, there are tugs of war that happen that we don't understand. And Chana thinks all these years, why can't I go ahead and have the brachas that everyone around me has? And little did she realize that she was going to bring an neshama into this world that was forever going to change the trajectory of humanity. And it wasn't simple, because the celestial sphere was unwilling to let go of that neshama. But she so badly wanted it. Now the amazing part is, you see the koach of a Jew. Who won the tug of war between heaven and earth? A woman. Right? A Jewish woman won the tug of war between heaven and earth, which is pretty amazing. Absolutely amazing. So just to show you the koach that we have in our tefillah. So I'm just pointing out, so we normally see petitional prayer that's answered, and petitional prayer that takes a little bit of longer time. But what I want to conclude with for today is there is another form of prayer that is not petitional prayer. If you take a look at number 10, so again, Rav Malamed highlights this idea, and this is actually a concept that's found in the Zohar. He writes as follows. So he explains in his opening introduction here that again, people normally associate prayer with need. Why do I daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Because I need something. And the more intense the need, the more intense prayer. Meaning, I would venture to say that those of us who have experienced an acute need in life, and you daven for that acute need, you daven in that crisis, and Baruch Hashem, the crisis passed, and life goes back to normal. This is going to sound strange, but there's a part of me that misses the crisis. Now, I don't really miss the crisis. What I miss is my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I had in that crisis. Because in moments of crisis, I realized that, you know what? I can't do this. I cannot do this. I am totally and wholly reliant on God. There are circumstances beyond my control. And then again, and literally, for any of us who have lived through crisis, you have that moment where you give yourself over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ribbon Shalom, you've got this. You've got this because I'm out of answers. I'm out of strategies. I don't know what to do. I give myself over to you. And then Baruch Hashem, there's resolution. You go back to life as normal. You daven, and then you realize, wow, you know what? I miss that. I don't miss the crisis, but I miss what it was like to have that connection of feeling like I place myself in your hands. I place myself in your embrace. That's one type of tefillah. But there is another type. Look at number 10. Hama'amikim yoser mevinim shegam shigras ha'chaim eina mushlames. So Rav Melamed says, but there's a deeper hashkafa to tefillah. And the deeper hashkafa to tefillah is, even when you don't need something. Let's say today, Baruch Hashem, you're in a good place in life, and you don't acutely need anything. Right? Everything, the big ticket items are cared for, and today, there's no acute crisis right now. Rav Melamed says, a thoughtful person always understands that there's always some level of existential crisis, meaning that there's no such thing as being in an absolute state of completion. Gam kishabrius tikina v'parnasa mitsuya. Even when my health is intact, my parnasa is good. Umatzavam hamishpachti tov. Family is good. V'chavereim ne'emanim. I have good friends. V'amatzav le'umi takin. And Klal Yisrael is doing well. Gam az anoshim regishim. Feeling and thoughtful people. Ba'alei modaos atzmis gavoa. People with incredible sensitivities. Chashim es chesronam hakiyumi. What Rav Melamed is describing over here is almost a state of existential lacking. Existential chisaron. Existential crisis. What's wrong in your life? Nothing's wrong in my life. Right? Everything is perfect. Everything is as it should be. But even people who everything is as it should be, understand on a deeper level, ultimately again, chesronam hakiyumi, a fundamental lacking which exists in my life. Vehem yodim shechayim mugbalim, because everyone knows, or actually thoughtful people know, that life has a gvul, life has a framework, life has a boundary. What does this mean? Gamim hakol yatov, even if everything is great, yavo yom vehem yamusu mizikna, everybody dies. So the notion, and we're going to end this year on a high note, right? Everyone dies. The notion that I die, and the notion that I don't know how long I have in this world, by definition, always creates an existential lacking, right? So I'm incomplete. You know why I'm incomplete on the most basic level? I don't control the most important thing in my life, which is my life. Right? The duration of my existence. Isn't that the most important thing? Right? How long I'm going to live? Am I going to reach this milestone? I don't control that. Now, most of us don't live with that awareness because it's a heavy awareness to live with. But thinking people do. And they realize that if I'm zochet to live to old age, right? I'm going to die. There's going to come a time where I'm going to be old and frail, and then my body will stop, and this life will come to an end. You see, a thinking person realizes that in life, nothing is ever stable. And nothing is ever complete. You see, most of us don't. The Arizal has this idea. The Arizal says, why do we cry by simchas? Right? Why do we cry by simchas? Right? Crying is an emotional reaction that is associated with sadness. But yet crying is such a common reaction to happiness, right? How do people go ahead? Most people, how do they relate? I should say most people, many people. How do they relate to extreme happiness? Tears of joy. Why? You know what the Arizal says? Deep down, the neshama knows that even the moments of acute joy are fleeting. They're fleeting. You can't hold on to them. You can't bottle it. You can't save it. And so right now there is intense simcha, but you know the nature of the human condition? I literally have no idea what happens in the next moment. So says Ramalam is something amazing. You see, there are two different groups of people. There are people who kind of live life in the present in the freeze frame. And you ask them, how are things? How are things? So again, what they'll say is, how are things? Well, okay, let me go through a checklist. Parnas is okay. Health is okay. Family's okay. Friends are good. Klal Yisrael is thriving. Everything's great. And good. And there's a second group of people who are the thoughtful chavra. And the thoughtful chavra, you ask, how are things doing? By the way, generally you shouldn't ask them how things are doing, right? But if you ask them, how are things doing? How are things doing? Well, Baruch Hashem, on a personal level, the immediate needs are cared for. But there's so many unknowns in life. There's so many unknowns. What's going to happen to that mishpacha that's fine right now? What's going to happen to that parnasa that's fine right now? What's going to happen to the health that's intact right now? I'm having a simcha, but who knows what happens tomorrow? And who knows what happens to Klal Yisrael? And life, the nature of the human condition, is this constant flux. You see, the great anomaly of life is the thing we crave most is, okay, maybe not, stability and predictability. That's what I want more than anything, right? I want to know what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, right? Stability and predictability. And the one thing you cannot have in the human condition is stability and predictability. Isn't that the great anomaly of life? The things I want most are the very things that I cannot have. So most of us just ignore that. But the thoughtful ones realize, you know what? Even when life is great, I want to point out, I'm not talking about personalities like there are some people who are always waiting for the shoe to drop. That's not what we're talking about over here. But a thoughtful person realizes that life is unpredictable. And life is unstable. And what's going to happen is totally unknown. So remember, the waiting for the other shoe to drop personality, that makes them generally cynical, jaded, and morose. What's the reaction of the thoughtful person? He or she gives themselves over into the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. See, look at what Rambam says. He says, Be'etzem, his kashrus, last four lines. Umitoch, tuchushas hachisar hazeh, heim ponim el HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You see, what do I do with this reality? What do I do with this recognition? That now life is so unpredictable. Everything is unpredictable. Even if right now I could check every single box, everything can and often does change on a dime. So what do I do with that reality? So the thoughtful person says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I align myself with you. I put myself in your hands. Because if I do that, I recognize that A, whatever change does happen is from you. And I also recognize that if I'm connected with you, I'll have the koach to weather whatever changes come my way. So this is a different model of prayer. Rav Melamed ends off, he says, Be'etzem, his kashrus shala adam ayidei tefillah el HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ha'adam maschil talich el hishtalmus ugeula. So Rav Melamed essentially tells us is that there are two different models of prayer. There's what we call petitional prayer. And what triggers petitional prayer? What triggers it? A need. There's a problem, and again, I'm a Baal Emunah, so I recognize I can't solve the problem on my own. I turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help me with the problem. That's petitional prayer. But the problem with petitional prayer is, okay, it's only if you need something. What if I don't need anything, Baruch Hashem? So all right, maybe the simple answer is you always need something. But again, there's a higher level of prayer, what we'll call existential prayer. And existential prayer says, I realize I'm always in a state of flux. I'm always in a state of need because I recognize that as a human being, I am always chaser. I am always deficient. Deficient how? Because I can't control anything in life. Right? It's not totally true, but you understand what I mean. I can't control my refuah, my parnasa, my mishpach. I can control my ruchnius. That's the one thing I can control. There's so many things I can't control. So because I can't control it, I have a choice. Either I can give up, I can become dejected and morose, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or I could create a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I could create the connection with He who does control everything. And even though I don't really need something right now, I'm good. Baruch Hashem, thank you Hashem. I'm good. But I'm going to align myself with you because that the nature of life is filled with twists and turns, ups and downs, all types of changes. So I'm not going to wait until I need something to connect with you. I'm going to proactively align myself with you. Create that dialogical connection. Create that relationship because I know the uncertainty of the human condition. And I know that if I proactively align myself with you, then hopefully that allows me to better weather those uncertainties. And when faced with those uncertainties, my relationship with you will give me the koach to overcome them. So 2 models of tefillah. Petitional prayer and what we'll call proactive prayer. Both correct. Again, we see, so if we bring this all together, it turns out that we see a machlokes, is tefillah biblical, is it rabbinic, Ramban, everyone agreeing that tefillah as we have it today, rabbinic, and again, a response to people unable to go ahead and articulate themselves. 2 different forms of petition, or I should say, 2 different forms of prayer. But even within the first form of prayer, petitional prayer, there's petitional prayer with an immediate response, that's like the avos, and petitional prayer with a prolonged response, chana. How do we relate to petitional prayer with a prolonged response? Because sometimes you don't realize that what we want is indeed so good and so beautiful and so holy that I'm locked in a tug of war with the heavens. But the good news is there is no stronger force on the face of this earth than a Jew. And a Jew has the ability to win that tug of war between heaven and earth. Second model of prayer, proactive prayer. Everything is fine in my day-to-day life, but I'm in touch with the fragility and uncertainty of the human condition. And I am not going to wait for crisis to create a relationship. I'm going to be proactive in creating that relationship so that when crisis comes, which it always does, I will be ready to meet it head on. We'll stop over here for today. We'll continue with this series. I think our next year is December 9th. I believe something like that, okay? We'll send out an email wishing everyone a wonderful day.